Hello, you're watching See Today Updates, and what we are seeing right now is the live relay of the official visit of Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese, to Indonesia. And at the current moment, the convoy of the Prime Minister of Australia is on the way from the hotel where he resides in Jakarta, which is the Raffles Hotel, and the convoy is now in progress to the Merdeka Palace in Jakarta. And later on this morning, Prime Minister Albanese will be welcomed by Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto.
Pundak kiri, Sandata! Rak! Maju! Jalan! Tegak, Sandata!
Pimpinan, saya ambil alih. Istirahat di tempat. Gerak.
And the convoy of Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese, is now entering the premise of National Monument. The route that Prime Minister Albanese was having towards the Istana Merdeka this morning was through Bundaran Hotel Indonesia, or the Hotel Indonesia roundabout, which is at the center of Jakarta, and through National Monument area. Also, he will oversee as well one of the landmarks of Jakarta, which is Monas, the Monument Nasional. And now the convoy is already very close to enter the Merdeka Palace here in Jakarta. And the arrival of Prime Minister Albanese this time to Jakarta is welcomed by not only the line of honor guards, but also the students of Indonesia from all layers of educational institution. We are seeing right now from the elementary as well as from the middle school or the senior school of Jakarta. And they are carrying the flag of Indonesia and Australia. And indeed, both countries are one of the closest neighboring countries, and they have been having 75 years of relation bilaterally in a lot of sectors as well, especially in education. And right now, the convoy of Prime Minister Anthony Albanese of Australia is passing through the Monument Nasional, or National Monument of one of the landmarks of Jakarta, and is welcomed by a line of honor guards as well. And last night, Prime Minister was arriving at the Halim Perdana Kusuma Air Force Base and also was welcomed by a line of honors of guards and by the two ministers, which is the Economic Minister or the Economic Affairs Minister, Erlangga Hartarto, and the Foreign Minister of Indonesia, Sugiyono. convoy of Prime Minister Albanese is also guarded by the motorcade as well as the cavalries and also the honorary guards. They are all convoying and now going past through the National Monument to Merdeka Palace, where later on Prime Minister Albanese will be welcomed by President Prabowo Subianto. And right now, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is entering the premise of Merdeka Palace. This is his official visit, which is the first official visit after being re-elected for the second time after his win. And he was just inaugurated a day before this and chose Indonesia as the first country to visit after the re-election. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is welcomed by President Prabowo Subianto, and now we'll be following the proceedings of the official ceremony taking place at the Merdeka Palace right now.
Siap! Hang! Hormat senjata! Hang! Tegak senjata! Perang! Lapor, upacara penyambutan siap dimulai. Selanjutnya pasukan siap diperiksa. Upacara penyambutan telah dilaksanakan. Laporan selesai. Kembali ke tempat.
And at the time being, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is introduced to the ministers of Merah Putih or White and Red Cabinet by President Prabowo Subianto. We are seeing attending this ceremony Minister of Digital and Communication, Mutia Hafid, and we also see the Minister of State-Owned Enterprises, Eric Thohir. We also saw the Minister of Research, Technology and higher level of education, Brian Yuliarto. We also saw the Indonesian ambassador to Australia, Siswo Pramono, and also the other ministers from the cabinet. And now accompanying Prime Minister Albanese in this visit to Indonesia is Senator Penny Wong, the Foreign Minister of Australia, and we also saw the Interior Affairs Minister of Australia, the Ambassador of Australia for Indonesia, Rod Brazier, and also several other delegations that come to Indonesia in this visit. And later on in the schedule, after the welcoming ceremony to Prime Minister Albanese, he will be then welcomed inside the Merdeka Palace. They will then proceed to Jepara Room, and they are scheduled to hold a tete-a-tete meeting and then continued with a bilateral meeting with the delegations of each country. And the two leaders are also scheduled to deliver press statements related to the discussions that will be discussed during the meeting. And through this visit, both countries highlighted the importance of strengthening strategic relations between Indonesia and Australia, in the Indo-Pacific region especially. And in addition, the meeting between the two leaders is also expected to further enhance the comprehensive strategic partnership that has been established between the two countries. And now Prime Minister Albanese is filling in the guest book. This is the book which all the world leaders that ever visited Merdeka Palace will be signing in. And at the time being, two world leaders are now starting the tete-a-tete session, accompanied by the foreign ministers of both countries as well. This is not the first time that President Prabowo Subianto met with Prime Minister Albanese. President Prabowo Subianto, back in 2024, before he was elected as the president, was visiting Australia as the defense minister of Indonesia and had a good meeting with Australia as well in terms of defense and security, especially in Indonesia and in the Pacific as well. And it's still fresh in our memory as well. Prime Minister Albanese visited Indonesia back in 2022. At that time, he was welcomed by former President Joko Widodo. In this tete-a-tete meeting, the two world leaders President Prabowo Subianto and Prime Minister Albanese are accompanied by the foreign ministers of both countries, as well as the home affairs ministers of Indonesia and Australia. And after the tete-a-tete, it will be continued with bilateral meeting, as well as with the delegations of both countries, and later on the joint statement by Prime Minister and the President. Hello everyone, once again we're welcoming you to see to the updates on the official visit of Prime Minister of Australia Anthony Albanese to Indonesia. As you could see before, the Prime Minister Albanese was welcomed already by President Prabowo Subianto. They had a very brief tete-a-tete meeting and then continues now with the bilateral meeting with all the delegations, and later on we'll see them again doing the press statement after the bilateral meeting is concluded. And it is a very important event as well, because Prime Minister Albanese chose Indonesia as the first country to visit right after his re-election for the second time, after the Labour Party won the election, just the day before he starts the official tour, beginning from Indonesia, and later on he'll visit Vatican and then Singapore. And with me today in the studio is Lina Alexandra, the head of Department of International Relations of CSIS, to discuss on the importance of this visit of Prime Minister Albanese to Indonesia this time. Thank you very much for being in See Today's studio. Mbak Lina, welcome as well.
you.
So what we're seeing right now, the visit again by Prime Minister Albanese, this time after his re-election for the second time, and choosing Indonesia. What does it mean? Does it mean that Australia sees Indonesia as a very important partner as well, because we're a very close neighbor, but also because of Indonesia's role that is strategically located very close, but also as a middle, sort of like middle party that is in between the two great powers that are having quite a rivalry right now in the
Well,
global
first
stage.
of all, I think it's a normal habit that Australia has. After they are having a new leader, they will visit Indonesia as their closest neighbor geographically, obviously. But at the same time, as you said, I think definitely it's because Australia sees Indonesia as a very strategic partner. We are now having a comprehensive strategic partnership with Australia, and seeing also, from geopolitical perspective, Indonesia, as you mentioned, also located, well, in the Pacific context, it's between Indian and Pacific Ocean. And at the same time, Indonesia is also being seen as, will be one of the leading economies in the 1 or 2 decades. So in that sense, I think we are close neighbor. We are neighboring middle powers at the same time. So I think from that perspective, I think it's very rightly timing for Australia to really visit Indonesia and start the discussion about, especially now amidst the geopolitical tensions that we are facing in the world today.
Yeah, as we can see, there are a lot of tensions happening in the world. One of them is the US-China tensions, for example. So you think, how do Indonesia and Australia see each of their roles as well in the Indo-Pacific, especially with the rising geopolitical tension between the US and China? I mean, we're very close. We are actually just right at the South China Sea.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of countries that are in disputes in this South China Sea dispute as well. So how do you see the roles of both countries?
Well, first of all, of course, the two countries, they are having different kind of orientation to some extent. We know Australia is the US ally, while Indonesia is a non-aligned country. We have a free and active foreign policy principle. But at the same time, we are, Indonesia is an aspiring middle power, while Australia at the same time also, playing a role as so-called middle power. And in this, geopolitical tension and contestation rivalry, I think the role of the middle powers are really key here. As US ally, Australia, is being a member of Quad, is being a member of AUKUS. And Indonesia, very recently, is also a member of BRICS. So I think the two countries can play very, prominent role, very significant role on how to bring their so-called minilaterals groupings to also raise the interest of on how we can maintain regional security, on how minilaterals can actually work together to mitigate the tensions among the great powers. Because each of the minilaterals, they have the so-called great power within the memberships. So I think it's very important how middle powers can really, bring up the agenda that all the middle powers, all the small powers are having. So the great powers can pay attention to it, and then that's how they can work toward, more cooperative relations among each other. So they are very instrumental, I think.
Okay, so how do you see all this time Australia has always been leaning towards the US and perhaps the Western countries as the member of Quad as well as AUKUS, and at the same time it's now, I mean, under Prime Minister Albanese, he was actually making sure that the foreign policy is also inclusive to the relation of Australia, strengthening its relation towards Asian countries. So how do you see these changes of what Australia is doing right now? Is it because of the fragmented world and because of the rebalancing as well of the global order?
I think Australia is a very unique country. I'm very, honored to actually, being able to study it in Australia before. So I really see, Australia is a very unique country in the sense that, yes, it's more kind of a Western-oriented. It's a US ally, as we already discussed. But at the same time, it is geographically located next to the Asian continent. So they, like Australia has a very unique interest because of its identity, So I think, but at the same time, I think it's really a blessing for Australia to be able to, situate it in that sense, But at the same time, I think Australia also, despite of being the US ally, Australia also has the interest to maintain a kind of a strategic autonomy. They understand that they have that label as the kind of a deputy sheriff to the US. So they just, follow whatever the US policy going. But I think they want to, gradually scrap that label, because that's something that the Asian neighbors always watching them, that they have the certain, perception against Australia. So they are aware of that. So that's why they are so much investing into the relations with their neighboring countries, which are actually Asian countries.
Okay. Yeah. Now, we see Australia and Indonesia's relation has been going on for 75 years bilaterally. It's perhaps ups and downs as well. I mean, we're having the ups and downs, but some of the Australia's interests are not to Indonesia's benefit. For example, the West Papua's issues. So how do we play around this? How do we navigate this relationship? We know that we need each other, but at the same time, there are some interests of Australia's that are very, how do you say, it's very sensitive to Indonesia.
I think, first of all, I think they have a basis to it. I think the human rights principle is certainly one of the core values that Australia as well as other Western countries are having. And at the same time, Indonesia also, also have the same principle of promoting and protection of human rights as well. But at the same time, I think the key is really, as neighbors, the key is really how you communicate with each other, how you can be transparent to each other. I think that's where trust can be built. We certainly understand that Australia as our neighboring country has that particular concern because of their core values within their society. We totally understand. But we also have another norm, basically respecting each other's sovereignty. Nobody wants their internal affairs to be intervened to some extent. So if they have concern, I think communication is really key. And that's why I think this kind of bilateral office is very, very important to really clarify, our, perception on certain things. And then we communicate on how we can collaborate together, to solve things, basically. Yeah.
And again, it is stamped by Australia how Indonesia is very key to them as well, as a neighboring country, as an ally too. And we're going for a quick break, and after that we'll continue to discuss more about Prime Minister Albanese's visit to Indonesia. So don't go anywhere, stay here on See Today Updates.
Ya mungkin namanya rumah sinari bumi juga tiba-tiba dari istri saya karena banyak cahaya yang masuk gitu di rumahnya. Jadi kita namakan sajalah rumahnya rumah sinari bumi.
Modern tropis dengan sentuhan Jepang dan Skandinavian.
Nah sebenarnya kalau Japandi itu kenapa agak naik daun? Karena menurutku nggak habis masa gitu. Kapanpun bisa dipakai, kapanpun bisa kita gunakan temanya.
Moto hidupku adalah bermimpi, berusaha, dan berdoa. Sebenarnya nggak nyangka juga sih, kayak tong setan ini, pekerjaan ini membawa aku sejauh ini sampai bisa main tong setan ke luar negeri.
Dari dulu aku sangat suka banget hal-hal yang berbau menantang dan ekstrim. Maka dari itu aku bisa terjun di dunia trail ini, yang dimana kan cewek itu jarang banget ya suka hobi di sini.
Seni itu udah jalan hidup saya ya Mas ya. Bisa bertahan di dunia kesenian, bagi saya itu udah sesuatu yang sangat mewah.
Mungkin ada yang bilang, apa sih gunanya seni itu gitu. Tapi buktinya sendiri, seni masih ada.
Aku ya, seni itu ya hidup. Kita hidup di dalam seni, kita membangun seni itu sendiri. Jadi kita menjadi satu, bahwa kita hidup di dalam seni.
Get ready for a fresh perspective on the news as we'll bring you the latest, interesting and inspiring news from Indonesia, Southeast Asia and around the world.
Time for some sports update.
Hello there, it's time again for See Today. This is for the second hour of the Sharon Show and you're still with me.
Pokemon Company is bringing exciting new projects to Indonesia, spanning sports, aviation and entertainment. So don't miss it. Catch all the latest updates only on
See Today.
Yang dulunya bos, kok tiba-tiba ada di sini? Iya.
Turun jabatan lo ya?
Iya.
Kayak gue. Saya Surya, saya podcaster di sini.
Oh, podcaster di sini. Halo. Saya Kiki, saya tim marketing di sini.
Bu, saya OB di sini.
OB?
Ada cerita menarik seputar barista yang ada di kedai kopi kamu. Percaya nggak sih ada orang yang nggak buang sampah selama hampir 20 tahun?
Kita punya metode. Jadi sampah-sampah dapur yang begitu bermasalah bagi orang lain, bagi kami justru kita butuhkan.
Rumah Oma Cafe ini adalah tempat pertama yang menjadikan para lansia untuk menjadi pramusaji. Bersama saya Indi Barens di Teman Bicara.
Hidup ini adalah sekolah. Setiap jam adalah jam pelajaran, setiap tempat adalah tempat belajar. Dan siapapun yang datang ke kita pasti mau memberikan pelajaran. Oleh karena itu, jangan lelah untuk belajar. Terutama belajar tentang diri. Karena kita akan seumur hidup dengan diri ini. Yang akan terus-menerus menemani kita, itu cuma diri ini.
Wonderful woman, welcome to All About Women.
Ketika saya masuk ke S2, kebetulan saya dapat beasiswa S2 Arkeologi UI. Profesor saya bilang, museum itu tempat belajar apapun. Oke, saya bikinlah program sekolah tari tradisional gratis.
Berharap bisa jadi jembatan untuk anak-anak yang memiliki nasib sama seperti saya, supaya juga mereka bisa keluar dari rantai kemiskinan gitu yang sudah turun-temurun di keluarganya.
And welcome back to See Today Updates. We are having a coverage, especially on the official visit of the Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese, to Indonesia. And before we continue our conversation on Indonesia and Australia's relation, as well as this visit's purpose, we will connect to our news team, Andira Putri and Fakhrian Bahri from the Presidential Palace. So Andira, what can you tell us from Presidential Palace or Merdeka Palace, where you are right now, about this official visit?
Yes, morning everyone. So we're at the Merdeka Palace, Central Jakarta, where currently the meeting between Indonesia President Prabowo Subianto and Australia Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is currently ongoing. So we are now on the second agenda of today, which is the bilateral meeting. Earlier we see that the Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese, when he arrived here at the Merdeka Palace, he also received an official state ceremony. So Indonesia is the first country that PM Albanese visited after he was elected for the second consecutive term. He just elected last Saturday, and then on like several days after, starting from yesterday, he already arrived here in Indonesia. This is quite interesting, and also it is quite promising because this really shows that Australia really put Indonesia as priority, because again we are the first country that PM Albanese visited after he reached the second consecutive term during his leadership period. So again, in here he will have a 2 days visit in Indonesia. So this is actually not his first visit. During his first leadership period in 2022, he also visited Indonesia. At that time, he was welcomed by Indonesia's 7th President, Joko Widodo, at the Bogor Presidential Palace, where they both have some of the interesting moments, not only for a bilateral meeting, but they also even shared a brief moments of riding a bicycle together just right across the Bogor garden. So yeah, we see that he always put Indonesia as a priority. In fact, previously he also mentioned that President Prabowo Subianto is a good friend of mine. Again, we also see that it is quite evident when he arrived here, like earlier during like around 10 a.m. Indonesia local time. We see that after he just went out from the car, he also received a warm welcome from Indonesia President Prabowo Subianto. It's quite festive in here in Merdeka Palace because, like I mentioned before, he received an official state ceremony welcome. We see there are a lot of troops, and again, a lot of the elementary school and junior high school children, which some kind of like give a warm welcome to the PM Albanese himself. And then after he received an official state ceremony, we see that he went inside for the credential, and currently we are on the bilateral meeting period. We still haven't got much details regarding what are the things that are currently being discussed on the bilateral meetings, as well as the official list of the ministers that are accompanying both of the leaders, although we see that there are some kind of glimpse from several ministers from each country. And then, but what we know so far is that Indonesia and Australia, again, not only that we maintain a close friendship between leaders, but also we have a quite good partnership in various sectors, which we see that some of them including cooperation in the economic as well as the defense sector. We see that the ministers already there, so we will wait for the official joint statement to see whether we will have another partnership or maybe another agreement, and all things that are being discussed between President Prabowo Subianto as well as PM Anthony Albanese from Australia. And we'll continue to give you further updates about this. Back to the studio.
Andira, just before we let you go, do you have any update on what will be the agenda, if there is any, after the bilateral meeting and the official visit at the Merdeka Palace is concluded this morning?
Yes, so again for today, aside from the bilateral meeting, for the official, it will be the Indonesia-Australia annual leaders meeting. So yeah, it is a part of his visitations to Indonesia, because it not only like signify the official like state visit and also a ceremony, but we also have the annual leaders meeting that continuously ongoing. In here, we see that there are, like I mentioned before, although we haven't really got much information regarding the bilateral meetings, but we see that there are some ministers, such as the coordinating minister for economic affairs, Erlangga Hartarto, from Indonesia, which again, like I mentioned before, we see that we already have a cooperation in the economic sector, which continue to be increased, and also the level itself being level up. So we see that we can expect economy is one of the sectors that will be discussed later by the bilateral meeting. And then after that, to see the result of the bilateral meeting, they will have a joint statement between Indonesia President Prabowo Subianto and PM Australia Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, where they will discuss about the result of the bilateral meeting, and if there are some kind of agreements or MOUs or LOEs, it will also be exchanged, which will be seen by both of the leaders. Alia.
Andira Putri and Fahrian Bahri, thank you so much for your report from the Merdeka Palace here in Jakarta. Now let's continue the discussion. Mbak Lina, it's very interesting to see this importance of the visit as well. And Australia was the first country to become the dialogue partner of ASEAN, and Indonesia certainly is one of the biggest country in terms of its population in the Southeast Asia region, right? So how relevant is ASEAN today if we see also that Indonesia is having a good relation with Australia, which is actually a member of Quad and AUKUS? So how are these two, when we see it in the perspective of regional diplomacy, having ASEAN and Quad in Indonesia and Australia on its relations?
Well, first of all, I think ASEAN is now probably the only regional organization that survives, after several decades already. And ASEAN has achieved a lot, certainly primarily on how it can help to maintain regional security, peace, and stability in the region. So I think the existence of ASEAN, no doubt, is a very, very important, very key for the regional security. And Australia certainly acknowledged this and really, respect the relations with ASEAN. And that's why, it really cherished the relations with ASEAN. It celebrated the ASEAN-Australia relations just last year, basically, with the summit, and they discussed a lot. And the fact that ASEAN is one of the key, and I must say, is a very loyal, very faithful dialogue partners, I must say, to ASEAN. And it always, from time to time, really assert the importance of the ASEAN centrality itself. Yes, you mentioned, on the other hand, Australia is also part or members of other multilaterals. But that doesn't neglect, I think, the importance of the relations with ASEAN itself. And as I mentioned earlier, I think the role of a country like Australia is very important, simply and exactly because it is being a dialogue partner of ASEAN, which certainly, really honor the ASEAN centrality, the role of ASEAN in dealing with its external partners. But at the same time, it's also part of another multilateral like Quad and AUKUS. So I think the role of Australia is very important, very key on how it can really connect, the relations between one regional organization and the other regional organization. Because certainly in the current situation, global situation, I think there's always interest and urgent need to actually connect and how we can deal with global issues, global problems.
Okay, so as you mentioned, Australia as being part of the multilateral like Quad or AUKUS, and Indonesia part of ASEAN, and we respect each other as well. But what role can both nations actually play in regional peace building? And do they have the credibility as well to mediate conflicts?
I think it really depends. I think the first thing is really, I think the principles are always there. If I can go back a little bit, I think from Quad, for example, there's an intention on how they can explore on how Quad and ASEAN can really work together.
Yeah, Quad has Japan as well and India.
And India,
yeah.
Yes. So that's why I think we also expect the same to India and Japan on how they can also bring up the regional interests, to come to the attention of Quad as well. I think there's a very strong interest of Quad to actually work on a lot of issues, security issues together with ASEAN to some extent. And AUKUS, although it's much smaller, it's Australia, UK, and the US. But I think with the Pillar 2, for example, on how the AUKUS would like to develop together, on advanced technology. Right, the quantum technology, the AI, for the defense purpose, of course, but I think that can benefit also in other sectors in order to maintain the regional security.
How do you see Australia being the member of AUKUS, which is actually more into the security aspects, and Indonesia being part of BRICS, where China is actually behind BRICS, and it's more economical. But all this time we see AUKUS sees BRICS as a competitor. How do you see this, and how should Indonesia and Australia navigate this?
Well, I think with BRICS, definitely Indonesia share some concerns, on how the world is changing now, So the so-called the Western-dominated world needs to be, revised to some extent. It's not changing the status quo. This is Indonesia's interest, but on how we can fix some of the problems that are being caused by the domination of the Western powers, which often sideline the interests of the developing powers. Right. So that's on the one hand. But then I think, again, there is always the room for cooperation, but that really goes back to the political will. If countries think that cooperation is much more benefiting in the long term, I think they should move toward that. Because now, as you see the world, the interest, is more on the pragmatism and very inward-looking. So they don't really see, multilateral cooperation is needed anymore, because a lot of free riders, if we work within the framework of multilateral cooperation, I think that's something that every countries, in every engagement that they have, or whatever, like multilaterals, regional organizations, whatsoever, I think that's something they really need to work together on how we can mitigate that and then going back to the, to the spirit of the multilateral cooperation. Because at the end of the day, we will all benefit from that, basically.
Well, Indonesia being a good friend of Australia, strategically located as well, and having this role as the door to opportunities to Australia's maybe economically, but at the same time as well as buffering Australia from its threat coming from the north. So if you could point out how strategic is the current Indonesia-Australia relations, maybe diplomatically in terms of security, in terms of defense, and I don't know, digital transformations or even cyber security?
Yeah. I think the bilateral relations between Indonesia and Australia is really, really important because we have seen, how successful it is really the relations between Indonesia and Australia on, for example, counterterrorism. And now I think we are, of course, even since 2008, for example, with the Lombok Treaty, we already, explored a lot of cooperation in maritime security and disaster relief, humanitarian disaster relief efforts. And now you mentioned about the cybersecurity. I think that's something that we really need to explore further because I think many countries more and more are being threatened by that particular threat. So I think the cooperation with a country, advanced country like Australia, I think that's something we are really eager. And if I may touch a little bit, but I can't really talk much on the economic side, but the critical minerals cooperation, I think, because both countries, they are, the producers of those critical minerals, which are very, very needed. If you want to pursue advanced technology, these rare earth minerals are the key commodity to be controlled. So I think the critical minerals cooperation between Indonesia and Australia, I think that's something like very strategic to be pursued in the very near future.
How do you see the role of, let's say, Australia and the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific? Indonesia is one of the countries that are initiating this as well, and Australia has always been there as a dialogue partner of ASEAN. So how do you see the role of Australia in ASEAN outlook of Indo-Pacific?
I think it's very important. Well, ASEAN outlook on the Pacific itself is basically it's a guidance on how ASEAN look at the Indo-Pacific context, basically, especially the challenges in the Indo-Pacific region. So I think on how we can, I think the really key now is how we can operationalize that ASEAN outlook on the Pacific into concrete cooperation. And one key area of cooperation, even two if you want to add the economic cooperation, I think the first one is really the maritime cooperation with Australia, which is actually already mentioned in the document of ASEAN Outlook in the Pacific. And that's why I think many countries now really eager to see on how this maritime cooperation can really pursue, because especially now, the current administration in Indonesia no longer talk about the global maritime fulcrum, for example, which was, the central policy of the previous government. So I think, we are being a maritime country, and Australia to some extent is really our neighbor, across the sea, basically. So I think they're also having the very strong interest to cooperate with us in, helping us with the, building up our capacities in the maritime sector as well.
Okay, in terms of trade, if you mention, even though we just touched on a little bit on the surface, all this time, Indonesia and Australia's trade relations are not really much surplusing on Indonesia's side. It's more on the Australia side. Although Australia is always having a good, will to say, Indonesia, come on, you have to level up, and we want you to be having more benefits as well out of this SEPA, for example. How do you see this can go a little bit even further for Indonesia's benefit?
Well, I think, it's not only trade. I think for me, the way I see it, investment is also very important. And that's why we can boost actually the trade. When we have more investment in this country, we can build up our manufacturing sector and so on and so forth. So in that sense, I think the homework is more on us, the way I see it. How we can build a very friendly investment environment so we can attract more investors into the country, including Australian investors, for example, in green sector, for example, to build up our green economy, because even though we produce a lot, if it's not according to the standard, then maybe some countries, they put that as the non-tariff barriers to, close the imports from our countries. So I think Australia can really help us in that, as well as other, climate standard, things like that, in order to reduce the carbon and so on and so forth. I think Australia is really a potential partner to work with Indonesia to build up those capacities.
Yeah, and the gesture of helping out is already there
exactly.
Regarding all the ESG standards that need to be met. All right, that needs to be met. Okay, now, is there any sensitivities? Are there any, perhaps, sensitivities or even trust gaps that still remain? I mean, historically, we know that Australia was in the support of the independence of East Timor at the time.
Yeah.
Timor-Leste, and were there still any sensitivities or maybe, gaps?
Well,
today?
Let me put it this way: as neighbors, there's always issues, right, with neighbors. And that's very normal, I think. And again, back to my point, really communication and transparency, that's really the key. So how we respect each other is through talking, basically, regular talks, and really the openness needs to be there. So there's always issue. We cannot predict, but if you look at the past, stories, then where are the issues that create the sensitivities. You mentioned one, West Papua, for example, and also other issues. But what I want to say is really the people-to-people connectivity, the people-to-people relations is really, really at the very good level, very high level now between Indonesia and Australia, thanks to a lot of development assistance that Australia has been providing to Indonesia through the scholarships and so on and so forth. So a lot of Indonesians actually studying in Australia, they understand Australian culture, and Australian also can get to know. Australia is a very mixed country, we see a lot of immigrants there and a lot of students there, So I think through that, the understanding of each other, I think, can be built. And that's how you actually invest on how you, deal with the trust gap. In the long future. It's a long-time investment, and it needs to be maintained.
Yeah.
I think that's really the key.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, as you mentioned, I mean, Australia is very much having this Asian flavor. I mean, if you walk by Melbourne somewhere in the city or something, you will hear some Asian languages being spoken everywhere.
Yeah.
So, how you see Indonesia and Australia? How will it, happen, or what will happen if Australia fails to treat Indonesia as a strategic equal? Is there any risks that will be posed?
I think if you look at the past history, of course, when certain leaders we know, they really, fails basically to, invest on the building the trust, and that's really the lowest point of the Indonesia-Australia relations at that time, especially during, in the post 9/11, for example, at that time when Indonesia was being seen as, the place where the terrorists are, things like that, And last time it was also the issue of the boat people, for example, when the Prime Minister at that time, Australian Prime Minister at that time, trying to push the boat people away, and then that creates some tension with Indonesia, and also the wiretapping issues, the Pancasila issue.
Right.
So I think in that sense, that sacrificed the relations, and I think like both Australia and Indonesia, we cannot benefit at all from those incidents. So that's why I think quickly after that, with the changing of the government, I think a lot of issues, a lot of tensions are being, mended, basically. So in that sense, I think there's always a risk. As well as like Australia look at Indonesia strategic, we also see Australia as our strategic partner. So I think, again, back to the, how our leaders can really, pay that attention, like really cherish the relations. I think if our neighborhood, our surrounding is peaceful, we can grow, right? I think that's the benefit of all. I mean, like, everyone wants that.
Yeah.
I mean, like, if something happened in our home and we are not in a good term with our neighbor, who will help us?
Nobody, because we rely on our neighbors.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you cannot rely on a far
Somebody
relative.
far away, yeah.
Exactly, although they are relatives. So that's why I think it's very important to maintain good relations.
Okay, so maintaining good relations, especially with neighbors, people to people, good communication that is built very closely. Those are one of the keys to good mutual relations between the two countries. Okay, we'll continue the discussion, but we'll have to take a break a little bit. Don't go anywhere yet, because a very juicy conversation with Lisa Alexandra here from CSIS will still continue, as well as the official visit relay coverage from the Istana Merdeka. So stay here and see Today Updates.
So this is hay, rumput kering.
Here, they care for dozens of healthy and strong cows.
So the key to good quality hay is to get good quality grass.
Kopi Luwak is brewed coffee using coffee beans extracted from the feces of the civet coconut mongoose.
Karena luwak pemandan terkenal dengan pemilih. Bagi kita ini udah mateng, tapi belum tentu bagi luwak nanti juga dimakan. Karena kalau luwak, mereka akan memilih lagi.
Indonesia is where the best adventures unfold under the open sky. A perfect canvas for extraordinary experiences.
I love this place. Absolutely love this place.
For more than 2 years now, I've been riding across Indonesia on my motorcycle.
So it's gonna be a beautiful day, guys. Let's go.
Selamat pagi, bro. Dadah, guys. See you next week, ya.
Bertani ini sudah menjadi warisan kakek nenek moyang kita sejak dahulu kala sampai sekarang.
Ayo kita bertani dengan secara organik, kita menghargai lingkungan, memanfaatkan apa yang ada di lingkungan. Namanya hidup di alam, menikmati alam, membangun peradaban.
Get ready for a fresh perspective on the news as we'll bring you the latest, interesting and inspiring news from Indonesia, Southeast Asia and around the world.
Time for some sports update.
Hello there, it's time again for CCD. This is for the second hour of the Sharon Show and you're still with me.
Pokemon Company is bringing exciting new projects to Indonesia, spanning sports, aviation and entertainment. So don't miss it. Catch all the latest updates only on CCD.
Apalagi bersama saya Imam Darto di Ngonten ngobrolin tentang Nusantara. Hap, hap. Wih, jangan banyak-banyak, Neng. Santai aja, lapar situ. Orang Malang ya?
Iya, Malang.
Oh, Malang.
Arek ngalam.
Oke, bisa baca bahasa ngalam?
Bisa.
Coba.
Matur suwun.
Wah, cuma segitu saja.
Ya, dia MD. MD-nya ada panjangannya tuh.
Apa tuh?
My Dream.
Hidup ini adalah sekolah. Setiap jam adalah jam pelajaran, setiap tempat adalah tempat belajar, dan siapapun yang datang ke kita pasti mau memberikan pelajaran. Oleh karena itu, jangan lelah untuk belajar. Terutama belajar tentang diri. Karena kita akan seumur hidup dengan diri ini. Yang akan terus-menerus menemani kita, itu cuma diri ini.
Wonderful woman, welcome to All About Women.
Ketika saya masuk ke S2, kebetulan saya dapat beasiswa S2 Arkeologi UI. Profesor saya bilang, museum itu tempat belajar apapun. Oke, saya bikinlah program sekolah tari tradisional gratis.
Berharap bisa jadi jembatan untuk anak-anak yang memiliki nasib sama seperti saya, supaya juga mereka bisa keluar dari rantai kemiskinan gitu yang sudah turun-temurun di keluarganya.
And hello to all of you, in case you're not aware, I'm Paul Palelli.
Langitazin ya.
Langitazin, long time no see.
Long time
Bener ya?
I make a lot of money. I have a company and I was like, I don't.
Cut.
Jalan ya.
6 stars if I could.
Ya elah, bakso di depan, boleh nih kayaknya sekali doang.
Oh, he's gonna tip me? Wait, is it Italian?
Yeah.
What's the background there? Mas Wemby, you're not getting off the hook in this one. Gotta answer.
I love them both.
Indonesia has many endemic species. Its wildness and uniqueness make its existence threatened with extinction. So, how do they try to conserve?
Air butuh tempat, tanaman butuh tempat, hewan-hewan butuh tempat.
Bersama-sama melindungi yang ada di sini ya.
Kita jaga, kita rawat, dan kita lestarikan.
Only in Wild Cage.
Ya, orang memanggil saya Raja Dangdut itu ya saya sendiri nggak tahu sejak kapan ya. Tapi kan semua itu yang menarik masyarakat.
Iya, maksudnya waktu aku workshop lagu itu aku ngerasa kayak ini relate banget sama aku. Jadi ya udah deh aku ambil.
At the age of 21, Leodra can be considered one of the brightest singers in the Indonesian music industry. Despite the fierce competition, Leodra stands out as one of the most prominent artists.
Bertani ini sudah menjadi warisan kakek nenek moyang kita sejak dahulu kala sampai sekarang.
Ayo kita bertani dengan secara organik, kita menghargai lingkungan, memanfaatkan apa yang ada di lingkungan. Namanya hidup di alam, menikmati alam, membangun peradaban.
Get ready for a fresh perspective on the news as we'll bring you the latest, interesting and inspiring news from Indonesia, Southeast Asia and around the world.
Time for some sports update.
Hello there, it's time again for CCD. This is for the second hour of the Sharon Show and you're still with me.
Pokemon Company is bringing exciting new projects to Indonesia, spanning sports, aviation and entertainment. So don't miss it. Catch all the latest updates only on See Today.
Welcome back to the See Today updates on the official visit of Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese. So the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, arrives in Jakarta for an official visit aimed at strengthening bilateral cooperation with Indonesia under the leadership of President Prabowo Subianto. This visit marks a new chapter in Australia-Indonesia relations, with both leaders emphasizing strategic trust and economic synergy across key sectors. Core discussions include advancing the Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, green infrastructure investment, defense collaboration, and cyber capacity building. Prime Minister Albanese and President Prabowo Subianto also reaffirmed their shared vision for a peaceful, stable and inclusive Indo-Pacific grounded in democracy, mutual respect and regional cooperation. Indonesia and Australia continue to move forward as equal partners committed to prosperity and security in the region and beyond. The newly re-elected Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was sworn in on Tuesday after his party's recent election win. He was sworn in for his second term by Australian Governor-General Sam Mostyn. Albanese then named the 30 lawmakers who filled the cabinet and outer ministry positions after his centre-left Labour Party won a landslide victory in the May 3rd elections. Labour has claimed 92 seats in the 150-seat House of Representatives. This is the lower chamber where parties need a majority to form government. As vote counting continues, Albanese said his government could hold as many as 95 seats.
I, Anthony Norman Albanese, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people in the office of Prime Minister.
Thank you, Prime Minister. If you take a seat, and if you could sign your affirmation of office, please.
And again, this visit of Prime Minister Albanese this time shows how it is a continuation of diplomatic efforts. The two leaders have already built trust, aligned strategic visions, and laid a foundation for deeper cooperation. Now, back with our discussion with Lina Alexandra of CSIS. So you mentioned how important it is to make sure that the people-to-people connection is built as strong as it could be, because this is a very effective diplomacy as well, other than, simultaneously with other diplomatic efforts as well. So what can be strengthened in terms of people-to-people connect between Australia and Indonesia in your point of view?
Well, first of all, I think the education, the scholarship, I think that's really the sector that, I could say this is really Australia's strength. And that needs to be maintained. And now, with the, because of the Trump policy, you see a lot of mindset has been changed, that we should no longer continue with the development aid and so on and so forth. And I hope Australia is not following the trail with, stopping, here in Indonesia, a lot of, debate with the USAID, disclosure, the closure of USAID. I think that's something we hope Australia is not following. And also, in addition to that, I think the core of that is the development aid, like on how we can invest more on the technology sector, things like that, with the youth as well. I think that's something that can be done in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Now, when we talk about prioritizing people-to-people, what ways has the Albanese government that you have already observed so far prioritizing people-to-people connection since 2022, if we may reflect back, especially with Indonesia?
Well, maybe I don't really remember much, but again, I think Australia, very interestingly, in the education sector, they're not only providing scholarship for the formal education sector, like the formal at the universities, things like that, but they also provide a lot of trainings in different sectors. Because I remember when I was studying there, I helped as an interpreter for the law enforcement training for Indonesian law enforcement and judges and attorneys, district attorneys, basically, to have almost 2 weeks training in Australia. So they are very, very generous, I think, in that sense. And that's something very, very helpful. So they are very attentive to the Indonesian needs in order to develop, because I think one of the sectors really building up our democracy, for example. So I think a lot of trainings to, for example, to our defense officials, to our law enforcement officials. I think those something really, really boost up the relations of the people-to-people connectivity as well.
Okay. Now, how do all right. Now, we are seeing, this is earlier in the morning. Now, I would like to touch on defense relationship. If you mention that we have a very strong already cooperation in terms of defense, will you say that this is already ultimate, or do you think as we evolve over time, there are still things that can be actually included in our defense pacts or anything, and regarding the security around Indonesia, ASEAN, in relation to Australia?
I think in terms of the joint exercises, as far as I observe, I think there's already really a lot, and really in a very, very good level, I must say, at this stage. Very recently I noticed there's Keris Humera, exercises, which is quite large. It's if I'm not mistaken, it's an amphibious nature. I mean, so it's not only the normal Army, Navy, but also almost the whole parts of the defense capability. So I think for to maintain, to enhance the interoperability capacity of the two armed forces, I think that's something super good, really, really good. And also the Super Garuda Shield, Australia, I think, is also joining. So in that sense, I think the traditional joint exercises, I think we just need to maintain that level, and if necessary, of course, add more to that. But I think we discussed also about the cybersecurity. I think that's something, the areas we need to work more in the future on how we can increase, our, as well as the traditional, within the same level like the traditional joint exercises. I think cyber might have a different nature, I must say, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Since you mentioned cybersecurity, what are security threats that actually need joint response? If there's any, maybe you could point out some in terms of cybersecurity or maritime, which is very crucial for Indonesia and Australia. Both we are only separated by seas, and foreign interference as well.
Yeah. Well, I think at sea, for example, maritime issues, I think we are now still facing issues like illegal fishing, for example, and a lot of criminal activities also taking place at sea, even like the people smuggling, things like that, So I think in that sense, our cooperation with Australia is really, really, because we are neighbors. We are facing the same, situations at sea, basically. And now I think, to some extent in relation to cybersecurity also, with the undersea cables, the threat to the undersea cables within Indonesian underwater. So I think that's something we need to acquire the capabilities in order to protect those facilities. So I think the cooperation with Australia is something that we should really look forward. We need to develop that more, right? I think those issues, at least, are in the list.
Now, if we see the conflicts that are happening at the time being, can both countries navigate, for example, the South China Sea tensions without antagonizing any major powers? Any major power?
I think the one that is very urgent to have in the region is how we can regulate how countries should react when there are incidents. So Indonesia is not claimant to the South China Sea, but there are a lot of problems. For example, when certain Coast Guard, trying to, shoo away some of the illegal fishermen, illegal boats entering into their, easy and territorial waters. Sometimes there are incidents. The water cannons, the sonar, that might inflict some, harm to the civilians, basically. So, and those incidents, if we are not having a kind of code of conduct, how we should regulate this, how we can, mitigate the tensions and then deal with those issues not through the, militarily, exactly, by using force. Because that can easily spiral into the open clash, open armed clash. And that's something we want to avoid, especially in the South China Sea area where so much tensions there, right? And that's something I think we can work together. But for me, I think, first of all, ASEAN members will have to sit together first before we reach out to Australia, for example, as the external partner. Right? The problem now is ASEAN is still not really working toward that, comprehensively. So I think that's something, again, the homework is with Indonesia. We need to reassert our leadership in ASEAN to work on very urgent, pertinent issues like this, a kind of regulation to regulate if there are incidents, unintended incidences. Then after that, we can, work together with our external partners.
I mean, how Indonesia could mediate those differences in terms of ASEAN member countries? We know that when it comes to South China Sea, maybe one country and a different country might have different perspective towards this conflict. But as being in the same bloc, which is ASEAN, as you mentioned, we need to work together to make sure that anything that is happening in South China Sea will not interfere or will not having a threat to Indonesia, to ASEAN countries. So how can we do something as Indonesia in terms of South China Sea as part of ASEAN?
Well, I think first, we need to differentiate between the territorial conflict, the overlapping claims on the territorial issues within the South China Sea and the incidences. Again, Indonesia is not a claimant to the South China Sea.
Right.
So the discussion about the code of conduct is still going on in ASEAN within the framework of ASEAN. That's one hand. That still has to continue. But on the other hand, meanwhile, because the negotiation is very at the snail pace. It's very, very slow.
Snail pace.
Exactly. But you cannot control the incidents, right? And this is something that is very urgent to be regulated if there are incidents, because they can't wait for the negotiations until the negotiations done, right? So we need a kind of interim COC, I must say, interim code of conduct, really focus on how we can deal with incidences. So countries will not jump into, using force. Simply because of those unintended incidences.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, now with the growing naval activities in the Indo-Pacific, should there be any bilateral maritime security cooperation that can actually make sure the framework or the code of conduct?
I think that's something that can be discussed, of course, although ASEAN has its own joint naval exercises. And that can be extended, of course, to can invite external partners like Australia, for example. I think that's something we can explore, certainly, depending on the needs. Yeah.
Okay. Now, let's go to the area of humanitarian assistance. How can Indonesia and Australia deepen both coordinations in terms of humanitarian assistance, disaster response across the region? We know that Indonesia is prone to disasters, and we need to enhance as well our mitigation tactics and strategies.
Yeah, I think that's something really, something that we can tap on Australia's advanced capabilities. As you said, we are very prone to disasters, earthquake, the forest fires, things like that, the haze issue. And definitely, I think that's the area that we need to continue working on with Australia, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if we look our vision for both countries forward, can Indonesia and Australia help shaping a stable Indo-Pacific beyond the great power rivalry?
Definitely, definitely. As I mentioned earlier, in the very beginning, we are both middle powers countries. At least Indonesia is still working toward that as a kind of aspiring middle powers. And in this kind of a geopolitical rivalry, I think the so-called middle powers coordination and collaboration is very, very key, to help mitigating the tensions among the great powers. Because each of the middle power, they have their kind of attachment, their own attachment to the great powers. And with their, coordination among them, they can bring out the issues. Okay, here are the issues that are very important for the middle powers, so they can, bring the attention of the great powers. If you keep fighting to each other, that will harm us, basically, So that's why I think they are very key. So Indonesia and Australia, they can bring up those issues to their own unilateral settings, basically frameworks.
In terms of South China Sea tensions, local conflict like West Papua, and the historical background that Australia was having with the countries, now neighboring Indonesia, like Timor-Leste.
Yes.
Okay. What steps then must be taken to realize all this vision, prosperous, stable, peaceful Indo-Pacific region?
Well, I think if you go back to the context of the bilateral, back again, transparency and communications with Australia, I think that's something we need to, we want to see in the future. And with the context of the Indo-Pacific, I think, strengthening the relations between ASEAN and the dialogue partners, especially in this case is Australia. I think that's something that can help to, maintain the stability and peace in the Indo-Pacific. And other than that, I think a lot of multilateral forums like the ADMM Plus, for example, that's the area really talking about the defense issue.
All right.
Between ASEAN and Australia as the dialogue partner. I think that's something that we can really continue to strengthen.
Okay, so we have to use all these platforms to make sure...
The existing platforms.
The existing platforms. Yeah. All right, we'll continue the discussion. And for now, we are taking a little bit of break. Don't go anywhere yet. Stay tuned and see to the updates on the official visit of Prime Minister Anthony Albanese.
Pindah ke desa itu yang jelas saya dan istri mengharapkan perbaikan dalam hal kualitas hidup ya.
Ada nih kehidupan yang harus kita pelihara gitu, dan salah satunya dengan tidak terus mengambil tapi mencoba juga untuk memberikan kembali kepada alam.
Ketika kita tinggal di desa, hidup jadi adem, ayem, tentrem.
Are you soccer fans and want to make cute jersey decorations like this? Don't worry, Life Hacks has tips on how to make these unique jerseys using origami paper. We hope the tips and tricks we show you this time are helpful for you. You can watch the next episode of Life Hacks to get more tips and inspiration for your life. Au revoir, bestie!
The Alpha generation, or also known as millennial children, is the youngest generation today. Cancel culture is an advancement of a series of bolder social process in the form of boycotts or canceling.
John F. Kennedy became the youngest president in the history of United States. The main cause of the outbreak of the Chinese Revolution was disappointment with the Qing Dynasty government.
In case you're not aware, I'm Paul Palelli.
Langitazin ya.
Langitazin, long time no see.
Long time no
Bener ya?
see.
I make a lot of money. I have a company, and I was like, I don't.
Cut. 6 stars if I could.
Ya elah, bakso di depan, boleh kayaknya sekali doang.
Oh, he's gonna tip me? Oh my God.
Wait, is it Italian?
Yeah.
What's the background there?
Mas Wemby, you're not getting off the hook in this one. Gotta answer.
I love them both.
Indonesia has many endemic species. Its wildness and uniqueness make its existence threatened with extinction. So, how do they try to conserve?
Air butuh tempat, tanaman butuh tempat, hewan-hewan butuh tempat.
Bersama-sama melindungi yang ada di sini ya.
Kita jaga, kita rawat, dan kita lestarikan.
Only in Wild Cage.
Ya, orang memanggil saya Raja Dangdut itu ya saya sendiri nggak tahu sejak kapan ya. Tapi kan semua itu yang menarik masyarakat.
Iya, maksudnya waktu aku workshop lagu itu aku ngerasa kayak ini relate banget sama aku. Jadi ya udah deh aku ambil.
At the age of 21, Leodra can be considered one of the brightest singers in the Indonesian music industry. Despite the fierce competition, Leodra stands out as one of the most prominent artists.
Indonesia is where the best adventures unfold under the open sky. A perfect canvas for extraordinary experiences.
I love this place. Absolutely love this place.
For more than 2 years now, I've been riding across Indonesia on my motorcycle.
So it's gonna be a beautiful day, guys. Let's go. Selamat pagi, bro. Dadah, guys. See you next week, ya.
Seni itu udah jalan hidup saya ya Mas ya. Bisa bertahan di dunia kesenian, bagi saya itu udah sesuatu yang sangat mewah.
Mungkin ada yang bilang, apa sih gunanya seni itu gitu. Tapi buktinya sendiri, seni masih ada.
Aku ya, seni itu ya hidup. Kita hidup di dalam seni, kita membangun seni itu sendiri.
Jadi kita menjadi satu, bahwa kita hidup di dalam seni.
The Alpha generation, or also known as millennial children, is the youngest generation today. Cancel culture is an advancement of a series of bolder social process in the form of boycotts or canceling.
John F. Kennedy became the youngest president in the history of United States. The main cause of the outbreak of the Chinese Revolution was disappointment with the Qing Dynasty government.
Yang dulunya bos, kok tiba-tiba ada di sini?
Turun jabatan lo ya? Iya, kayak gue. Saya Surya, saya podcaster di sini.
Oh, podcaster di sini. Halo. Saya Gigi, saya tim marketing di sini.
Bu, saya OB di sini.
OB.
Welcome back to this special coverage of the Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese's visit to Indonesia. The Australian Prime Minister, Albanese, arrives in Jakarta for an official visit aimed at strengthening bilateral cooperation with Indonesia under the leadership of President Prabowo Subianto. This visit marks a new chapter in Australia-Indonesia relations, with both leaders emphasizing strategic trust and economic synergy across key sectors. Core discussions include advancing the Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, green infrastructure, investment, defense collaboration, and cyber capacity building. Prime Minister Albanese and President Prabowo also reaffirmed their shared vision for a peaceful, stable, and inclusive Indo-Pacific, grounded in democracy, mutual respect, and regional cooperation. Indonesia and Australia continue to move forward as equal partners committed to prosperity and security in the region and beyond. The newly re-elected Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was sworn in on Tuesday after his party's recent election win. He was sworn in for his second term by Australian Governor-General Sam Mostyn. Albanese then named the 30 lawmakers who filled the cabinet and outer ministry positions after his centre-left Labour Party won a landslide victory in the May 3rd elections. Labour has claimed 92 seats in the 150-seat House of Representatives. This is the lower chamber where parties need a majority to form government. As vote counting continues, Albanese said his government could hold as many as 95 seats.
I, Anthony Norman Albanese, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people in the office of Prime Minister.
Thank you, Prime Minister. If you take a seat, and if you could sign your affirmation of office, please.
And back to our discussion with Lina Alexandra from CSIS. So how do you see this official visit and its importance for both countries? Do you think it will be more towards Australia's benefit or Indonesia's benefit? I mean, we saw that the entourage or the envoy, as not that many from Australia's side actually, but we had quite numbers of ministers that were attending this official visit, that were attending at the Merdeka Palace. What do you think?
Well, I think both sides certainly are benefiting from this visit. Especially, you know, we are now facing a lot of issues at the global level, you know, the geopolitical rivalry and so on and so forth. So I really look forward for the result from the bilateral discussions between the leaders and the ministers for sure on how they can forge stronger relations in order to navigate their ways, you know, both of our ways to deal with a lot of challenges that are arising from the geopolitical rivalry. Yes, I think, but at least the way I see it, you know, first, I see a very clear sky today.
Oh, yeah.
So I think it's a good sign.
a good sign.
It's a good sign for both countries' relations in the future.
Yeah.
And the fact that, the one that welcomed the Prime Minister's students, I think that really indicates on how we really want to invest on the future generation, on the next generations. And I think, as we discussed, education sector is really one of the key sectors that Australia has been investing in the relations with Indonesia. And we really cherish that and hope that Australia, the new administration under the Prime Minister Albanese will continue its commitment to support this area for Indonesia.
Well, you experienced yourself, you were in Australia for some time, so taking your master's degree or bachelor degree as well in Queensland. What kind of differences, if you may point out, in terms of education in Indonesia and in Australia? We know that Indonesia is now going towards more out-of-the-box thinking. We are trying to be more in a way that we don't only learn the theories, but we also need to make sure that the kids know how to understand, the surroundings, know how to apply what they learn in class in the real situation. Can Australia's education system help us with this?
Well, I'm one of the benefactors of that.
Okay, I can see the success example here.
Yeah.
Successful
So
example.
I think the first thing that I notice is the education system in Australia is different to Indonesia, because first, it really, allowing the students not only focusing on the theoretical, really on pursuing certain grades, something like that, but really how to become a human being, basically, to be connected to the nature, to have some life skills, basically, which is very important. I mean, like, it's not only the courses that you study, but how you interact with the nature, how you interact with each other, and based on that, and how you think, basically. You make arguments, things like that. So I think that's something that I personally really cherish that, And secondly, I think, as I mentioned, it's really a multi-ethnic countries. So when you study there, you interact with so many people from different ethnicities, from different countries, and so on and so forth. And I see, in that sense, Australia is really welcome towards these, immigrants, things like that. And that really enrich the country's perspectives on how they should engage with other countries.
Yeah, I mean, even if you go to a public school in Australia, you'll meet not only native Australian students, but also other ethnicities that actually go to school there. Which is actually an added value for any student to learn not only, one specific uniformity of, relationship or socializing way, but very, very diverse as well, and very rich. But how do you feel about this? We saw that the Minister of Higher Education, Research and Technology, His Excellency Brian Yuliarto, was also attending. It means that we put attention in education, especially in higher level education. So this as well was seen in Australia as a good country that teaches lesson as well in terms of higher education, you think?
I think so, yeah. I mean, like, although I'm from the political science when I was studying in Australia, but I see in other faculties, I think in other schools, I think that Australia is very, I must say, have a lot of variety of, of schools, really for applied science, I must say. They have a very specific courses open for people to really study. And if you see from the degree, even like so many unique degrees you can find, it's because they have a, very in-depth, courses. So it's not only Master of Science, but they have a lot of applied science, which I think very suitable, for Indonesians to study, because again, because of the challenges in the future.
In terms of transformation towards green economy or green sustainability, what can we learn from Australia? Have they gone through the roads that we haven't done yet, because Indonesia is still a developing country, we're still doing a lot of producing, we're emitting as well. At the same time, we're trying to meet that standard of ESG and sustainability.
Well, I think a lot, really. At least this is from my personal experience. For example, the way they, manage the clean water, even like very simple, and how they do the waste management, things like that. For the sustainability. I think that's something that we need really to learn from Australia. In terms of the commitment toward that green transition. I think they are very, very, one of the countries in the world that is very, very strongly committed with the how to tackle the climate change impact from a very small, cases, as I mentioned earlier, the transition to EV cars, for example, you see more and more electric cars. And the government, in Australia.
Yeah, I haven't gone to Australia for a bit, sometimes now. But have they gone? I mean, have they really been, going towards EVs, like the majority of Australians?
Exactly. So either EV, like full EV, or hybrid cars. I think is really on the rise now. Yeah. So I think they are very, very committed to that. Even like using the. I think it's been a long time ago. I mean, Indonesia already now. No longer using plastic bags, things like that. The recycle things. I think they really enforce it very well.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember during my high school time, they took us to this waste management site to see how they did it. It means from early age they have actually instilled this idea to younger students, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Now, is there enough investment though in terms of cultural exchanges, creative industries? I mean, Australians are very creative as well in terms of their way of managing their cities, and with the perspective of having, as you mentioned, trying to make people very human, having this combinations of outdoor facilities that is making the people, not only working, but they also have the sense of surroundings that built them as a complete human.
Yeah. So I think one point that I've mentioned is really, I think, the sister city cooperation. I think that's something with our local governments, for example, need to be pursued in the future. Because as you see, the system in Australia, they are, states basically.
Right.
Like it's a federal government. So I think that's something we can pursue, between our province, for example, stronger cooperation with certain state. I know it's there, but at the people level, we don't really see the impact of it. So I think that needs to be bigger cooperation in terms of building relations between our provincial government and the state level government in Australia.
Okay. Now, if we talk about travelings or tourism sector, I guess for most Australians, Bali is their second home, right? But and as well as for Indonesians, they opt a lot to go to Australia for their travels. What do you think we can enhance in terms of Indonesia trying to expose more to the world, maybe through the mouth of Australians? Because they are the ones who have already, come and believed in our country as a good destination for tourism.
Well, one thing for me, really need to show the other parts of Indonesia.
Right, not only that.
Because still...
jewel of Indonesia is Bali, definitely.
Exactly, but I think, to be frank with you, even up until now, some of the Australians, they don't know about Indonesia, but they know Bali.
Okay, so like Bali, Indonesia is a part of Bali, something like that?
Something like that. I've never been to Indonesia. But then I asked them, have you ever been to Bali? Yes. I said, that's part of Indonesia. So even up to this day, there are still some people, Australian, that, they only visit Bali. So I think this is really the challenge for us to introduce that Indonesia is such a big country, it's such a beautiful country with a lot of tourist destinations other than Bali that you can visit.
Okay.
But again, we need to do our homework. We need to fix the infrastructures, everything for them to, or we really enjoy our vacation in Indonesia, not only in Bali.
Yeah, they should visit Labuan Bajo, Likupang, and other parts of Indonesia.
And lots like Sulawesi, things like that, right?
All right. Now, we'll continue the discussion, but this one is an update as well on Indonesia, Australia. Farming has always been a big part of the Hmong culture. When many Hmong fled Laos in the 1970s and settled in Tasmania, they brought the tradition with them. Hmong-run vegetable stores are a familiar sight at farmers' market, but as younger generations grow up in Australian society, many elders worry they're turning away from farming.
The farming skills of Di Tao's family are well known.
My culture is we only usually in the mountain. We always farm to rice at the mountain, and then we do like farm veggie. I like to do the farm.
At age 10, Tao and her family fled to Tasmania, Australia in 1976. The Hmong people faced persecution in Laos after the Civil War of the 1960s, having supported the United States in its fight against communism, a fight rooted in their desire to protect their independence and way of life. It is estimated that around 100,000 Hmong lost their lives trying to escape Laos. Many, including Tao's family, sought refuge deep in the jungle. At the time, Tao's daughter Dee was just an infant. She survived on a makeshift milk made from washed wild potatoes. For over 30 years, Tao and her husband have worked the land in Richmond. Farming has always been at the heart of Hmong culture, not just a livelihood, but a way to lay down roots in a new world, just as Tao's family has done. But times are changing. Tao has noticed that her children don't share the same passion for farming that she and her generation did. The effort and long hours no longer seem worth the financial return for them.
When school holiday, never go holiday, they say, Mom, my holiday is just on the farm.
The young generations that have more ideas, more opportunities to look at things a different way.
Researcher Margaret Elridge notes that while the Hmong community takes pride in seeing younger generation explore new careers, it's also a source of anxiety.
They're worried about what's going to happen to their farm, along with the potential to lose the farming community is the social structures, the customs, the traditions which are very much associated with farming.
Still, Tao remains hopeful for the future of her farm.
I shooting, but 2, 3 say no, 2, 3 say yes.
Far from the mountains of Laos, Di Tao's farm stands as a testament to resilience and heritage. But as the children forge new paths, the fields that once offered refuge may face an uncertain future. For now, Tao continues to plant with hope, believing that someone will answer the call of the earth.
So it's a story about the Asilims of Laos in Australia. Now, talking about that, how has the cooperation between Indonesia and Australia on combating people smuggling have evolved over years, in your point of view, Malina?
Well, I think definitely this is the challenge for both countries. I think the cooperation is still there, especially among our law enforcement. I haven't, to be frank with you, I haven't noticed there's a spike with it. So I think there's a very strong collaboration on that, you know, and that has to continue. I think, especially between the Australian Federal Police and Indonesia, I think there's a strong collaboration, coordination on that.
Yeah, and it's always being discussed in ASEAN meetings.
Exactly.
About this.
Exactly.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
And does Australia still rely on Indonesia as a transit country to help enforce its people to stop the boats policy?
Well, as I mentioned in the past, that has been very controversial because
in the citizens,
exactly is a very strong statement, and well, I must say there's a quarrel at that time, you know, because we disagree with Australia's policy to push away the boat people, because obviously they are not aiming toward Indonesia as a destination, but they are aiming for Australia. But they push away. But we, for the sake of humanity, we cannot just let them at sea, basically. I think now there's not so much. There's still some, the flowing of especially the Rohingyas, and also some other people from other countries. But I think now the cooperation is there. At least, as I said, the communication has been there. There's some coordination among our immigration officers, I think. So it's going well so far. That's why we haven't seen anything in the news. Yeah, so I think that's something. Hopefully there will be no further influx. But as you said, and we discussed earlier about more and more conflicts are taking place. And, like we all know, the result of the conflict is always victims and a lot of times refugees going everywhere. And that will, trigger another influx of refugees. And that's something we don't expect, basically.
Okay. Now, I was just intrigued a little bit more about your statement that Indonesia needs to actually strengthen our maritime security, as we're a maritime country. And as we see a lot of conflicts happening right now, especially with the neighboring countries, what can we do, Indonesia, in terms of this security in maritime, maybe in collaboration with Australia, since we are very much neighboring with Australia and just apart by the ocean? Yeah, because as you see, we are an archipelagic country. We are a big maritime country, and we see a lot of quote-unquote doors to enter into Indonesia. Yes, it's like no doors, basically. It's open.
Exactly, it's open. And with Australia, especially the Lombok Strait. Right. So I think to really safeguard, monitor these, non-existent doors, our existing capabilities, I think, is not sufficient.
Right.
And that's why we need to work together with the neighboring countries to do, again, the joint patrols, things like that. I think that's something we really need, the support from our neighboring countries. And in this case, it's Australia. Assistance really, really important, very meaningful for Indonesia.
Right.
Yeah.
There are some times where, this country, we talked about how Indonesia needs to increase its disaster risk management as well. And there are times where there are always happenings like natural occurrences, and we need to act fast. So do you think Indonesia and Australia can collaborate more in terms of climate adaptation and in terms of mitigation on risks as well?
In relation to disasters, you mean?
Yes.
Definitely. I think I don't have the details with me now, but I believe there is already strong cooperation between our National Agency for Disaster Relief and also the Australian counterpart to enhance our capacities. And also in the very immediate emergencies, I think Australia has always been ready to help. Like in the past, for example, during the tsunami, Australia also sent a lot of, as part of their capacities to help the Indonesian victims, the Acehnese.
Aceh tsunami.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, there's certainly a lot of sectors that can be Indonesia and Australia be in cooperation with, since we are very close neighboring countries. And we'll still continue with the discussion as well as with a report from the official visit of Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. But stay tuned and see Today Updates.
Ya mungkin namanya rumah Sinari Bumi juga tiba-tiba dari istri saya, karena banyak cahaya yang masuk gitu di rumahnya. Jadi kita namakan sajalah rumahnya Rumah Sinari Bumi.
Modern tropis dengan sentuhan Jepang dan Skandinavian.
Nah sebenarnya kalau Japandi itu kenapa agak naik daun? Karena menurutku nggak dihabis masa gitu. Kapanpun bisa dipakai, kapanpun bisa kita gunakan temanya.
Moto hidupku adalah bermimpi, berusaha, dan berdoa. Sebenarnya nggak nyangka juga sih, kayak tong setan ini, pekerjaan ini membawa aku sejauh ini sampai bisa main tong setan ke luar negeri.
Dari dulu aku sangat suka banget hal-hal yang berbau menantang dan ekstrim. Maka dari itu aku bisa terjun di dunia trail ini, yang dimana kan cewek itu jarang banget ya suka hobi di sini.
Seni itu udah jalan hidup saya ya Mas ya. Bisa bertahan di dunia kesenian, bagi saya itu udah sesuatu yang sangat mewah.
Mungkin ada yang bilang, apa sih gunanya seni itu gitu. Tapi buktinya sendiri, seni masih ada.
Aku ya, seni itu ya hidup. Kita hidup di dalam seni, kita membangun seni itu sendiri. Jadi kita menjadi satu, bahwa kita hidup di dalam seni.
Get ready for a fresh perspective on the news as we'll bring you the latest, interesting and inspiring news from Indonesia, Southeast Asia and around the world.
Time for some sports update.
Hello there, it's time again for See Today. This is for the second hour of the Charlie Show and you're still with me.
Pokemon Company is bringing exciting new projects to Indonesia, spanning sports, aviation and entertainment. So don't miss it. Catch all the latest updates only on See Today.
Yang dulunya bos, kok tiba-tiba ada di sini?
Turun jabatan lo ya? Iya, kayak gue. Saya Surya, saya podcaster di sini.
Oh, podcaster di sini. Halo. Saya Gigi, saya tim marketing di sini.
Bu, saya OB di sini.
OB.
Ada cerita menarik seputar barista yang ada di kedai kopi kamu. Percaya nggak sih ada orang yang nggak buang sampah selama hampir 20 tahun?
Kita punya metode. Jadi sampah-sampah dapur yang begitu bermasalah bagi orang lain, bagi kami justru kita butuhkan.
Rumah Oma Cafe ini adalah tempat pertama yang menjadikan para lansia untuk menjadi pramusaji. Bersama saya Indi Barens di Teman Bicara.
Indonesia is where the best adventures unfold under the open sky. A perfect canvas for extraordinary experiences.
I love this place. Absolutely love this place.
For more than 2 years now, I've been riding across Indonesia on my motorcycle.
So it's gonna be a beautiful day, guys. Let's go.
Selamat pagi bro. Dadah guys. See you next week ya.
Welcome to See Today Business, your go-to source for the latest economic and business updates from Indonesia, Southeast Asia, and around the globe.
Get ready for a power-packed show of insights, interviews, and analysis that will keep you ahead of the curve.
So what we're trying to do here is that bonds, these are basically Indonesian government bonds, IDR bonds.
And we'll have our daily recap from the stock market that you don't want to miss, so stay tuned only on See Today Business.
Hidup ini adalah sekolah. Setiap jam adalah jam pelajaran, setiap tempat adalah tempat belajar, dan siapapun yang datang ke kita pasti mau memberikan pelajaran. Oleh karena itu, jangan lelah untuk belajar, terutama belajar tentang diri. Karena kita akan seumur hidup dengan diri ini. Yang akan terus-menerus menemani kita, itu cuma diri ini.
Welcome back to See Today updates on the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's visit to Jakarta. And at the time being, the two world leaders and the delegations are now conducting the bilateral meeting at the Merdeka Palace. So let's now go to Merdeka Palace to see the bilateral meeting that is now taking place at the site. As you can see, there are several ministers from the red and white cabinet under President Joko Widodo's leadership. President Prabowo Subianto, I am very sorry to repeat that, Under President Prabowo Subianto's cabinet, we see some ministers. We see Foreign Minister Sugiono. We also see the Minister of Coordinating Minister for Economic Affairs, Erlangga Hartarto. And also attending this bilateral meeting, State-owned Enterprise Minister Erick Thohir, the Minister of Higher Education, Research and Technology, His Excellency Brian Yuliarto, and also the Home Affairs Minister, Tito Karnavian. And from the Australia side, Prime Minister Albanese is assisted and also accompanied by the Foreign Minister Penny Wong and the Home Affairs Minister of Australia, and also other delegations as well. So this bilateral meeting started earlier and is now still taking place after the tete-a-tete, and then continued with the bilateral. And earlier, Prime Minister Albanese was welcomed by President Prabowo Subianto himself.
Salam sejahtera berita sekalian. Members of the Australian government, it is a pleasure to see you again since our last meeting in Lima, Peru. I would like, first of all, to thank you for the great honor you give us by visiting Indonesia as your first foreign state visit. As you know, the relations between our two countries have been strong and have been good. And your visit here, once again, emphasizes this friendship, and we really appreciate it. I would like also personally to congratulate you on your re-election as Prime Minister of Australia, and with the historic victory of your party in your parliamentary elections. I welcome once again this opportunity to strengthen our engagement and our cooperation in bilateral, regional, and even in global, in the global context. In all the fields that we have achieved good progress and good cooperation, we would like to enhance this cooperation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President, and I'm honoured to be visiting Indonesia once again as my first bilateral visit after our election. As you know, Mr. President, we were only sworn in our new government literally the day before we embarked on this journey to our neighbour, our important friends here in Indonesia. And I wanted to, both symbolically but in practice as well, demonstrate to both of our nations how much we valued the friendship here in Indonesia by this being once again, just as after 2022, this being my first bilateral meeting. Today we have had a very productive one-on-one meeting as well, and I thank you for the friendship and the way that we're able to discuss issues of common interest. Said before, Indonesia is an indispensable partner for Australia, and our two peoples have an unbreakable bond. That relationship goes back to the Macassans visiting Arnhem Land in the Northern Territory, and there is heritage there that can be traced back well before Europeans came to this part of the world. I hold the people of Indonesia in a special place. This is my 4th visit here as Prime Minister, and I look forward to the discussion and dialogue that we'll have today, discussing our growing comprehensive strategic partnership, but also how we can deepen economic engagement with Indonesia and Southeast Asia more broadly. Your leadership in ASEAN is very important in what is the fastest growing region of the world in human history that we have seen. Now is the right time for us to enhance cooperation under the comprehensive economic partnership, and I look forward to productive discussion today to achieve our shared objectives. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I do fully agree with your remarks. Australia is not only a close neighbor, and I think we are destined to be close neighbors.
So that was just a glimpse of the bilateral meeting between Indonesia and Australia, where President Prabowo Subianto and Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, and they sort of like had a little bit of comments on the bilateral meeting. Both have actually congratulate each other for the leadership. President Prabowo Subianto congratulating Prime Minister Albanese once again for his re-election. And Albanese was saying as well that Indonesia is an indispensable partner for Australia. So what can you comment on their statements just now?
Well, I think certainly, exchanging good notes, basically, exchanging good notes, congratulating each other. I think that's, of course, something we expect as an opening.
Yeah.
But I think what I want to underline is really when the Prime Minister of Australia mentioned that Indonesia is really an indispensable partner for Australia. I think he truly means it when he says that. For the reasons that we already discussed.
Yeah.
We are two neighboring countries. We are very close geographically, and we are two neighboring middle powers. Then we know we have the potentials to actually help mitigating tensions and shape the new regional architecture through our engagement bilaterally, and also through ASEAN, for example, as Australia is one of the key dialogue partners for ASEAN.
Yeah, and this is, in fact, Prime Minister Albanese's 4th visit to Indonesia.
Exactly.
It means that the relationship is really close. And again, there are certain aspects that President Prabowo Subianto said would like to be even more strengthened because there are always good opportunities out there for Indonesia and Australia to be in more relations, closer relations. And at the time being, what's happening in Merdeka Palace is that both leaders are preparing for the joint press conference that is taking at the Jepara Room area, but we're still waiting for that. So let's discuss a little bit more on this visit, Mbak Lina. So as we see that Indonesia and Australia is doing good progress in terms of climate adaptation, as well as renewable energy and sustainable energy going forward, especially for Indonesia as well. What can be explored more in these areas? From your perspective, we don't know whether it was discussed in the bilateral meeting, but perhaps one of those crucial factors as well, sectors as well.
Yeah, we hope that will be discussed. As we know, the green transition, as far as I know, again, I'm not an expert on this, but the way I learn it is to do the green transition is not cheap. we need a lot of investment on that.
Yeah.
You know, we need, that's very costly, to be frank. That's where the temptations really, you know, because once we are committed to it, and then it's very costly, then we are always tempted to actually go back to the, you know, for example, the coal-based economy, for example.
Yep.
So that's why we need the assistance from developed countries like Australia, for example, to share their technology, you know, to give the necessary assistance for us to, you know, to speed up the process for the green transition and the climate mitigation plan as well.
Yeah, because at the time being, some countries have actually come into the thinking of put aside this efforts of, you know, going green and all that because of those reasons that you mentioned. It's not cheap, it's costly, and for some reasons it's not the ultimate results that they get, you know, at an instance immediately.
Yeah.
But for Indonesia, we are still in the track and we are committed to the Paris Agreement as well. So you mentioned about Australia can be a good partner as well in supporting Indonesia in terms of energy transition through technology and funding. You mean this is as well as the maybe to the layers of knowledge as well, because when we get the funding, when we get all the facilities, but we need our human force as well to be able to do it as the enablers, I mean as the doers.
Yeah, to share the knowledge. Yeah, I totally agree with you, because now we have the framework called the JETP, the Just Energy Transition Partnership. So that's why I think that the key really here is how we can partner with the developed countries. So they don't only put, they're not only you know, just putting the standards there, but they're also helping countries like Indonesia through the partnership framework to be able to meet up the commitment. Although it's probably much lower, but compared to the developed countries, but at least you know, through the partnerships they can provide the assistance that we need.
Okay, we always discussed about how Indonesia is being an indispensable partner for Australia, and from the perspective of partners, trade partners. I mean, Australia is having China, Japan, South Korea. I mean, some of their partners are located in Asian countries. So it means that Indonesia could also be like a gateway as well for them to make sure that these partners are secured. What is your perspective on this?
Still on the climate area, the energy transition?
The trade partners.
The trade partners.
Because, you know, Australia is seeing Indonesia as a gateway, but as well as a buffer as well for any threats that are coming from their north part, where Indonesia is actually located right on the north of Australia.
Well, I think this is something we need to explore, especially when you mention South Korea, Japan, China. They are also the same dialogue partners for us. So I think the coordination among the dialogue partners, you know, through ASEAN, and that's why we call it ASEAN centrality. I think that's something that we really need to, you know, develop, pursue in the future, definitely. Well, we have that framework, maybe not necessarily in the trade area, but at least in the security area, we have the so-called East Asia Summit in the past, which is basically the ASEAN +8, where the countries that you mentioned, including Australia, are actually members of it. So I think, again, we do not need to reinvent the wheel. There are existing platforms there that we can utilize. And nowadays, unfortunately, amidst this geopolitical tension, we're no longer talking about this East Asia Summit mechanism where you know, ASEAN dialogue partners can sit together and talk on how we can solve the global issues together, basically.
Okay, let's talk about you know, the people-to-people, and you mentioned that this is very important. When it comes to Australia, it's proven loyal to Indonesia as well. So I was going to say, how can we actually strengthen this people-to-people connection as we are having this long relationship, and we know that a lot of people have actually gained the benefits of being educated in Australia. And the assistance that were given were actually very immense in terms of Indonesia's side as well. So what can we strengthen in the future in terms of this collaboration in education sector, people-to-people connection in the future for Indonesia?
Well, first thing I want to mention is I think Indonesia in particular really need to seize the momentum, because now under the Prime Minister Albanese is really the peak of the relations between Indonesia and Australia, and the re-election of the Prime Minister Albanese, I think, is really positive for Indonesia. There's a stability in terms of the relations. There will be no change of policy that we need to anticipate to some extent.
That's true.
So I think that's something that we really need to seize the momentum. And secondly, I think, as you asked about the people-to-people connectivity, I think in a lot of areas, cultural exchanges, I think that's still very important. I think in the past, if I'm not mistaken, there were more Indonesian language class being given in Australia.
Yes.
And I remember, I noticed, I think already more than a decade, I think that has been gone. I think that's something probably that can, reinvoke again somehow.
Yeah.
So the interest on Indonesia, the understanding about Indonesian cultures and history and so on and so forth. I think that's something that probably the Australian part can pick up.
Right.
And also, again, I mean, like exchanges of students can be done as well. The vocational training can be provided. As I mentioned, more trainings, I think, to be given to different sectors in Indonesia.
Yeah.
I think we saw the footage about the coverage about the agriculture as well. I think that's something we might want to explore.
Yeah, because
in terms of the
the alignment in the resiliency of food for under President Prabowo.
Exactly. So the food security is something also very pertinent for both countries. So maybe the exchanges among the farmers, maybe that's something very important to pursue in the future.
Right, agriculture, and also their beef is also good.
Exactly, yeah.
When you talk about sister city, Jakarta is always very active in building the relationship with sister cities around the world, including with Australian sister cities. But when you talk about sister city, it's not only about tourism. It's about other things that comprises of one city that can be taken as a very good destination tourism-wise. So it means it's the people, it's the infrastructure, it's the surrounding, it's the environment, it's everything, services. So when you talk about sister city between Jakarta and Sydney, let's say, for example, what are missing so far, let's say, from our side, from Indonesia, making this sister city benefiting Indonesia's side?
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of things that we can cooperate. I'm not, focusing on this area, but at least from my observation as a layperson is, for example, that city management. We talk about the waste management, the provision of clean water, for example. We're still struggling with that, to be frank, in this country. And also in different areas. I think, for example, the digital services, for example. I think that's something we can work together, especially the public services. I think in Australia, they are very good in terms of the provision of public services. And that's something probably we can exchange together on how we can provide better services for the people in different areas. So a lot of issues, I think, that like the detail of course goes to different local governments about what they need from their sisters actually in Australia. But I think a lot of areas we can discuss, even like the flood management, for example. The area where I used to live in Queensland, they always experience big flooding as well. So I think.
And how did they handle that?
Well, I'm not too sure, but I learned. I mean, like they are struggling as well. But the way I think they control they really take care of their rivers, for example, to clean the rivers and how to desalinate the waters, for example, for provision of clean water, even drinking water, for example. I think those kind of areas are probably, something that can be worked with,
Yeah, I mean, Indonesia is surrounded by water, needs to make sure that we have clean water available for 270 million people of this country.
Exactly.
Okay, and we can certainly learn about that from Australia.
Exactly. And also, I think the solar panel system, I think, well, yeah, in Jakarta, still a lot of houses already using it, but in Australia, especially in my area when I used to study before, they call it the Sunshine State.
Wow.
So they, a lot of houses, they put the solar panels on top of the roof.
So it's powered by...
Exactly, and they can, actually sell the electricity accumulated by the solar panel, so they can reduce the electricity bill, basically.
Okay. Yeah, one of the things that Indonesia is facing right now is that solar panels are actually capturing the solar energy, but it's during the day. It will be used during the night where the sun is no longer there. So perhaps that needs to be learned a little bit more into its intricacy and details on how to preserve this energy. Because it's proven successful in at least in Queensland where you were. Having the experience. Okay. When we talk about, we did have a touch on humanitarian framework and assistance. Can we focus more on this, especially with the help of Australia, in terms of humanitarian framework that focuses on protecting human and as well as workers, let's say, and the transnational crime? We did talk about the smuggling of people, and under Prime Minister Albanese, it's pretty much under control. It means that they have been doing their own homework as well. But is there anything that we can actually have this working on better in the future?
Well, definitely, I think I mentioned about the law enforcement cooperation. That's something we really need to pursue. And within that law enforcement cooperation, of course, there's intelligence sharing, things like that, right? To really deal, because we know with these people smuggling, they are transnational, as you mentioned. It's part of the transnational crimes. So data sharing about these criminals, things like that, and the cooperation to eventually catch them.
Right.
I think that's something very important. We can't do that without the support of the other countries' law enforcement authorities. So in that sense, I think that's something we can really, really pursue together in the future.
All right. Well, there's certainly a lot of aspects that can be discussed when it comes to Indonesia and Australia. And this is proven because the bilateral meeting has been going on for quite some times now, since the tete-a-tete, and then now both leaders as well as ministers and other delegations are now having the bilateral meeting and focuses on many aspects, including the defense, including the security, including the cyber security as well, maritime security. And we're still waiting for the results. And later on, after the bilateral meeting, both leaders, Prime Minister Albanese and President Subianto, will join for the press statements later on after the bilateral meeting. All right, now before that, we've got some update for you. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese arrived in Jakarta for an official visit that aimed at strengthening bilateral cooperation with Indonesia under the leadership of President Prabowo Subianto. This visit marks a new chapter in Australia-Indonesia relations, with both leaders emphasizing strategic trust and economic synergy across key sectors. Core discussions include advancing the Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, green infrastructure investment, defense collaboration, and cyber capacity building. Prime Minister Albanese and President Prabowo also reaffirmed their shared vision for a peaceful, stable, and inclusive Indo-Pacific grounded in democracy, mutual respect, and regional cooperation. Indonesia and Australia continue to move forward as equal partners committed to prosperity and security in the region and beyond. newly re-elected Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was sworn in on Tuesday after his party's recent election win. He was sworn in for his second term by Australian Governor-General Sam Mostyn. Albanese then named the 30 lawmakers who filled the cabinet and outer ministry positions after his centre-left Labour Party won a landslide victory in the May 3rd elections. Labour has claimed 92 seats in the 150-seat House of Representatives. This is the lower chamber where parties need a majority to form government. As vote counting continues, Albanese said his government could hold as many as 95 seats.
Congratulations, Prime Minister. Prime Minister. Welcome.
Just like you, please.
Yeah.
How are you?
Sign your affirmation of office, please. Congratulations, Prime Minister. Prime Minister. Welcome.
I, Anthony Norman Albanese, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people in the office of Prime Minister.
Thank you, Prime Minister. If you take a seat, and if you could sign your affirmation of office, please.
And certainly, Prime Minister Albanese's visit to Indonesia, which is the first country to visit after his re-election, is something that is a momentum not only for Australia but also for Indonesia. And President Prabowo congratulated Prime Minister Albanese in early May, right after he was re-elected and securing his win. And after that, Prime Minister Albanese managed and prepared his visit to Indonesia and, of course, other countries, and this first official visit of him after re-elected. So, to conclude our discussion, Mbak Lina, what can you say about the importance of this visit of Prime Minister Albanese to Indonesia this time in terms of the good relations, in terms of strengthening of collaborations in many sectors, as well as keeping the stability, good relations, you know, amidst these geopolitical situations that are quite warm at the moment?
Although it's a normal habit, I think, for Australia, for the new government in Australia to visit Indonesia, but the fact that the Prime Minister Albanese immediately make the visit without hesitation, I think that really signifies the importance of Indonesia as an indispensable partner for Australia. But on one hand, it takes two to tango. So Indonesia should also seize that momentum, see Australia as our indispensable partner as well, in order to maintain the regional security, peace and stability. And the role of middle powers, as these both countries are very important really to mitigate the tensions and again to shape the new regional architecture that are peaceful, that are really pursuing the prosperity for all countries. And I think the very strong cooperation, the partnership, the engagement between Indonesia and Australia are really instrumental for the regional security in the future. So I think with a great hope, hopefully in the future, the two leaders can really work together, communicate well, share the transparency together, for the sake of the regional prosperity and security.
Just like two good friends, saying we're neighbors anyway.
Good neighbors. Yes.
Exactly. Well, Lina Alexandra, Head of Department of International Relations of CSIS, thank you so much for giving your insights as well as your perspectives in this relations between Indonesia and Australia, especially in the first official visit of Prime Minister Albanese after his re-election. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we'll continue to update you with what's the result after the bilateral meeting, especially on the joint press conference with Prime Minister Albanese and President Prabowo Subianto addressing both in front of the press later on in breaking news. So stay tuned only in See Today. Thank you.
Moto hidupku adalah bermimpi, berusaha, dan berdoa. Sebenarnya nggak nyangka juga sih, kayak tong setan ini, pekerjaan ini membawa aku sejauh ini sampai bisa main tong setan ke luar negeri.
Dari dulu aku sangat suka banget hal-hal yang berbau menantang dan ekstrim. Maka dari itu aku bisa terjun di dunia trail ini, yang dimana kan cewek itu jarang banget ya suka hobi di sini.
Are you soccer fans and want to make